I'm a
Hey, good evening. It is March 10th, 2024. This is not the face you expected to pop up, but King Michael is off tonight. So it is I, Sarah Paranormal. You are watching Legit Paranormal on legitpodcast.com. To follow us on social media, it's Legit Podcast, DOTCOM. Spell it out. YouTube at Legit Podcast. Please, our hosts work so hard. Like and subscribe for us. And speaking of amazing hosts, with us as usual is Cyn Shrader Hill Author. How are you tonight, Cyn?
Even though it's not the usual face, it's such a beautiful face to see, though.
Why, thank you. Very much, Cyn. Oh, I forgot to mention, too, we are now streaming on Parapost Network Central as well, so please support Parapost. Cyn, I am super excited tonight. So when I first got into the field, you know me, I'm a research girl. The first thing I did was buy a bunch of books, and I got Psychic Dreaming, Mind Over Matter. Oh, that's the back of it. I got a paranormal case book, and I got ESP, Hauntings and Poltergeist, and they are all written by our guest and my teacher at the Rhine Institute, Professor Paranormal himself, Loyd Auerbach. Hi, Loyd. How are you tonight?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So we were kind of talking a little bit. Hey, Jenny. A little bit backstage. And Cyn, I had mentioned to Loyd that I am the only parapsychological field investigator on the team. So I have fights sometimes, especially on Paranormal 101. So tonight I'm excited because not with you. No, never with you. You listen, but you know, everyone else, the guys. So I'm excited, Loyd, that you're with us tonight to back me up on some parapsychology facts.
Sure.
So I know it's kind of a big question, but for our viewers that may not be familiar, can you give us just kind of a brief description of like parapsychology and what you do with the Rhine Institute?
Sure. Well, parapsychology is actually the science that studies the paranormal. It studies psychic phenomena. Television has very little role in what we do, although we may appear on TV from time to time. We study experiences of extrasensory perception, and there are several types of those. We study experiences of psychokinesis or mind over matter, several of those applications. And we study incidences and experiences with hauntings and apparitions and poltergeist phenomena, all of which relate to other things. The three buckets in parapsychology: ESP, that's information that we get without the senses; psychokinesis, it's mind directly acting on the physical world; and survival of bodily death, which includes out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, apparitions, as well as reincarnation and mediumship. We do all of those things, some of which we can study in the lab. Most of the survival stuff we can't because it's all spontaneous. And the one thing that I have to say about the whole approach from the TV shows, which is frankly created by producers, not by actual science-based investigators, which, by the way, our field's been around in one way, shape, or form since 1882. So it's not a new thing. But the one thing that we do, we look at how all of these experiences interact, because there's ESP involved in ghost sightings and hauntings. There's psychokinesis involved in poltergeist phenomena, and all of that kind of comes together for us.
Do you have any questions about? Go ahead.
I do. What is your favorite of the three? What is your favorite to study?
Well, I mean, I can say that I'm probably a ghost guy more than anything else over the years. I consider myself a generalist because I'm basically an educator in many respects in parapsychology. But I've been doing investigations since my first semester in graduate school back in 1979. And those kinds of cases outside the laboratory are much more interesting. I find the laboratory work really interesting, but early on, I decided I didn't want to get involved in the math and statistics. So working outside the lab made a lot more sense. And because of it, I've had a lot of really interesting ways of gathering information and working with great people out there in the world.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I'll say that what I do. Just let you know what I do for the Rhine actually is I right now I'm teaching a number of courses. We have an education center, and our next group of courses, which includes a course on survival of bodily death, is coming up in May. I'm also president of the board of directors, so that's more of a
Well,
I don't know.
You're a little bit busy.
I might have taken that class.
A little busy.
I am. Yeah. I actually have a full-time job too, so
Wow. It's a lot.
And
it's dedication and passion.
Yes, it has to be.
Well, it is. It is. I think I probably go crazy if I just kept with a normal job during the day. This has been my interest since I was a kid. It's why I got a graduate degree in parapsychology to begin with, and why I write the books that I write. I mean, even the two mystery novels I've co-authored so far, we've got a third one in the hopper right now. That's based on some of my experiences, and the characters are kind of related to people that we know.
So did you have experiences when you were a child?
No. Talk about coming from TV. I was exposed to the idea of ghosts and psychic stuff on television from a very early age, but not documentary stuff. It was shows like Topper and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and then Star Trek and Dark Shadows. My dad worked for NBC, so I had a TV set in my room when I was 2. So I'm a child of the but I'm also a child of knowing behind the scenes, because I spent a lot of time behind the scenes in production. My dad was eventually a producer for NBC, and then a producer on his own. And my uncle was a director of soap operas. So I actually know the behind the scenes process for all this, which is why I've done so much TV myself. I really found, because I was a little science geek, lucked out and found the science books on parapsychology in the library by people like J.B. Rhine and some of his colleagues. And that really captured my attention, even though I'd read books by Hans Holzer and other people before that. But no experiences until I got out of high school.
Wow.
I want to pull something out there really quickly, because we've mentioned science a couple of times, and this is a particular, I won't say argument, we'll say debate that I've had with several people on this show. When we say we're studying the science of it, people take scientific paranormal investigation, right? And we associate it now, because of the television shows, with the things that go beep and light up. And because there's technology, we say that's science. Now, can you explain a little further? I believe I remember taking in one of my first courses with you, we talked about how parapsychology is more of a social science.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that, Loyd, for me?
Sure. Well, first I want to say something very important. Using technology does not mean you're doing science. It does not mean you're being scientific. Otherwise, we are all being scientific. We're using smartphones. We're cooking with a microwave. I mean, I know how a microwave works, but most people wouldn't know how that even works. And I know so many people I've met in the paranormal world who have not even read the instructions on their equipment. Forget about knowing how it works. They haven't done that. You can't claim you're doing science because you can do the same kind of thing that a chimp could do with that same piece of equipment, right?
Right.
There's a scientific method. And I will say that not all investigations that even I do are scientific in nature in the way we do them, because we can't control the environment. We can't really apply the scientific method the whole way, but we are studying the experiences, and we can bring to bear the art, think of it as the art of the science. So what parapsychology has learned about how to do the investigations, how people experience them, to some extent why, that's applied science. And that's what we were doing in our investigations. But with the technology, there is no technology that can detect anything paranormal. We know that. Maybe the TV shows don't know that, but we know that. And you can't even design something because you're trying to detect something we have no idea what it is. And it's what you do with the data across the entire case that might make this more scientific.
Right. So it's the observation, the taking of notes, the recording data, and then coming up with a conclusion that's scientific.
That's right. And also connecting it to people's experiences, because as you mentioned, parapsychology, studying the experience of ghosts, studying the experience of hauntings and poltergeist phenomena, that's all makes it a social science. We don't have a ghost to study, so we are not a biological science of ghosts. We can't look at the physics of ghosts because we don't have a ghost to study. We don't have any actual real correlations across the board. So we can only compare any of the environmental sensors or technology and also the witness testimony to each other. Humans are designed to detect these things. We have the experiences. So without the human experience, and I know a lot of times I hear from people after the fact that the ghost hunting group kicked them out of the house, didn't even want to know what the experience was, and just based their conclusions completely on an EVP and maybe a couple of things from the EMF meter, which is not scientific. It's beyond not scientific.
Right.
It actually makes no sense.
Cyn, do you have any follow-up questions for Loyd? I can see your face.
I have just an observation that has happened more than once over investigations, that when you can prove that they are not having anything happen in their house that is paranormal, you've got some faulty wiring. I'm so sorry.
Right,
you need to call an electrician, and they get mad at you. They're so furious that they can't, and they want people there to watch.
Right. I mean, honestly, when I and the people hopefully I've trained properly, get an investigative call. Let's just say we get the lead for an investigation. Part of it is a pre-interview. I will not go someplace unless I get a chance to talk to people on the phone or by Zoom up front. Email doesn't give me enough information. And when I explain what we're going to be doing, one of the things I will tell them is, look, first thing we're doing is we're looking for normal explanations for each event that you have reported, because even in the most best paranormal cases where I think there's an apparition present, because you're on edge, people make mistakes in their perceptions and conclusions. So it may be you have a real apparitional experience, but everything else could be explainable. How do you feel about that? And if I get a real pushback on that, it's like, I don't know that we can come and investigate, because you're not going to necessarily listen to my conclusion unless it's the one you expect. And that doesn't really work.
Yeah, it's almost like they start shutting down there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah.
And I still use, so I don't know if you're doing it again. Winter classes look like they're wrapping up and spring classes are going to begin. So I don't know if you're doing the field investigators class, but I still use the interview questions from that class.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, that class is in week 6 this week. So we are kind of finishing that up right now. And I'm also teaching the paranormal the course on technology and its appropriate use.
And I also took that class, and I can also recommend that class as well. Just good classes to take on the very basics of being a competent field investigator. So let's take that word then and sort of ask a question off of that. I keep saying field investigator because we're not going to call it a ghost hunter or paranormal investigator. And I sort of got that from you. So can you sort of tell us, like, in your mind, what the biggest difference is between a field investigator and a ghost hunter?
Well, I mean, the term itself, ghost hunter, goes back. A guy named Tim Prassel, who has written some great books on Victorian and pre-Victorian investigators and investigations. He has found reference to ghost hunting and ghost hunters far back as the late 1700s. So it is not a new term, even though it's been claimed as a new term by some of the TV folks. Harry Price used that. He was a real field investigator on this subject. He did a lot of work in the laboratory as well. Of course, Hans Holzer took that term also. But I think what most folks are using it for today is because they've seen it on TV, and it means that they're looking for cases and they think they're doing investigations. The reality is that when we talk in parapsychology about doing a field investigation, we are out in the field. This is something normal for most fields of science, that you are either in the laboratory or you're in the field. And the field means outside of the lab. You can call yourself, you can say paranormal investigator. A lot of people interpret that as you are paranormal yourself and you must be investigating things related to that. It's like a paranormal detective in fiction is often someone who is a psychic who's doing investigations. So the term is misinterpreted, just like with ghost hunter as well. So if you are doing investigations, but that is more than necessarily just a visit and an overnight stay. So many of the TV shows, they're not doing investigations. They are going in and shooting a segment for the show that is part of a potential investigation, but it's a visit more than anything else.
Absolutely. We have a viewer question. So Cyn, before I kick it to you, I want to bring that up really quickly. JK47 Paranormal asks you, Loyd, about what your thoughts are about the SB7. So using a spirit box.
Oh, a spirit box. There are all kinds of spirit boxes. I find it interesting. A friend of mine who passed away a couple of years ago was an investigator, knew Frank of Frank's box.
Frank.
And that was created apparently to try to communicate with extraterrestrials. It was not created for ghosts. And apparently the idea came from the guy from Frank watching the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Wow.
With the radio, and there's a segment in there where Richard Dreyfuss is driving to Devil's Tower, and the AM radio starts shifting up right and gives him messages from the aliens, basically. So here's the thing. If a spirit box is truly using a random system, we know in parapsychology a couple of things about using random systems to test for ESP and test for psychokinesis, mind over matter, with living people. Number one, random systems often go out of randomness. And even with our very good laboratory equipment, you have to test it to see if it's still random with nobody trying to affect it. And I don't see that ever happening with spirit boxes. That's if it actually is a random system to begin with. Number two, it's just as likely the living person's affecting that as a ghost, because if you have no other indication there's a ghost present, it's probably you. We know that living people, we have plenty of data from the laboratory that living people can affect random systems. So that's a major thing. And it may just be that if there is a spirit present, that spirit needs to work with your consciousness to also affect that as well.
Right.
But then there's the other problem of interpretation. I've seen so many really bad interpretations or forced interpretations, making whatever they hear fit what the question is, regardless of whether it's even intelligible or even makes sense. That's a bigger problem.
Yeah. I think that's like it's like pareidolia, but with our ears almost like.
Yeah, audio pareidolia. Yeah, audio pareidolia is. There have been studies recently about that with EVP, and it's a problem. It's a real problem.
Mm-hmm. And it really just kills me when any of the shows put up the phrase as they're playing it.
Yeah,
I usually hear something different.
Yeah.
Well,
the
recent study showed that if you played an EVP, a good EVP, to people, they had a group of people, and 85% of them did not hear what afterwards they were told it said. 15% heard that. Then when they tried another EVP and they told everybody in advance like that, they gave them the information, 85% actually heard what they were told it said. 15% still didn't hear that. I would be in that 15%. I've heard EVPs from people who swore it said something. It's like, yeah, it sounds like blah, 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 to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Recently, there was some kind of clip, and Sarah, you might know what I'm talking about. I know they have played it on YouTube, on different places, but it was a phrase, and they said it's saying this word, and then they said, now we're going to play it again, but I want you to see if you can hear this word. And you can hear both of them if you're thinking about that word. You can hear both words.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's really interpretation of how we hear things. You know, it'd be really interesting as an experiment to take an EVP that sounds clear and playing it for somebody who's not an English language speaker and having them write out phonetically what they're hearing.
That's a good idea.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. Or even people from different parts of the country with different dialects, you know, there's that too.
Right.
What dialect?
I mean, I can't understand. I can't. Well, half the guys from this show are from New England. Rick lives on Block Island in Rhode Island, and so I can't understand them half the time. So I guess that's why when we do a clip show where we review evidence, and they're like, I hear, and I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I can't even understand you, let alone the EVP. So speaking of the clip show, we've got a new show on. We call it Is It Legit? Mike and myself do it. And recently we've been taking on some of the let's say the bigger attractions. I'm going to call them attractions, like amusement parks for the paranormal. So the one we've been discussing lately is the Conjuring House. I don't know if you pay attention to all that media garbage, Loyd, but there was an instance that kind of blew up where it was found that somebody was possibly faking evidence by cracking ankles under a table, just like the Fox sisters did. This isn't new.
Right,
I mean,
right.
come up with the Fox sisters did that as well. And the point is, when you're at a place and you're filming live, and this place is charging $1,500 for TikTok influencers to film there, doesn't the money suggest that you have to deliver something paranormal, and then that would lead to possible fakery? So I guess that's a long question. I just wanted to know where it was coming from. The actual question, Loyd, is what do you think about these places being investigated over and over and over again and charging outrageous amounts of money for people to sleep there and investigate? Do you think that they are still haunted, or is it all the people coming in and their energies?
Well, I mean, that's two questions.
That's true.
I think that there have been a number of historical places that have been able to really fix themselves up and exist because of the attention the shows have cast on them. On the other hand, I've known of places that have been on TV occasionally, and because I've worked with a restaurant here in the Bay Area for years, and occasionally after they were featured on some TV clip or other, they never really, there was only one exception where they really charge a location fee, and that's because they had to shut down for a week, and they were working restaurants, so they had to pay employees. But otherwise, they wouldn't let anybody come overnight, and they were getting demands from ghost hunting groups. And they didn't want to charge anybody or do anything else because, number one, it would actually be a question of letting people run rampant in a restaurant where the liquor's not even locked up. That was a whole thing, and there's an issue, other stuff. But there are some other issues around that. I really don't see a problem if they are charging a lot of money, but what your second question was, they should not fake anything. They should have them sign something right up front, knowing that we cannot guarantee any activity. You will not sue us or do anything else. You think the place is haunted. The past evidence says that, period. That should all be a simple legal document. And then they can charge whatever they want. But the question, actually, that latter part of that question, are ghost hunters affecting the place psychically?
Right.
A haunting is an imprint of past events, not a conscious entity. And all of this ghost hunter activity, I know I've heard of several places where the activity that's now being reported is different than what was originally reported. And it's partly connected to the ghost hunters who have been there. So we as investigators have to be careful not to do that. But unfortunately, all this kind of paranormal tourism is causing lots of changes over time.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know that you can help it sometimes. If you have a very emotionally impactful experience, maybe you leave something behind, but it's a good point that the living can haunt places too. And having done home investigations, I found that a lot of it was not the negativity of anything, quote unquote, paranormal, but energy of the people living in the house.
Well, that's actually how we define in parapsychology, how we define a haunting or a residual haunting, that it is the energy or information left behind by living people. The dead have nothing to do with hauntings. The dead have everything to do with apparition cases, but not to do with hauntings any more than an old movie that you can watch now where everybody who made the movie is dead has anything to do with their being dead. I mean, that old movie was made when they were alive. Hauntings are made when people are alive. And it can be a number of different types. It can be emotional energy. It can be informational. How we pick it up is different from person to person also. But it's in the environment. It's not, and that's what sometimes connects to some of the environmental sensors much more than apparitions do.
Right.
I did not understand that at first, but when you came around explaining exactly, because our day-to-day living, highs and lows, accidents that happen, all that kind of stuff gets imprinted. So I see exactly why you're saying that.
I think most people have experienced a haunting by walking in. Let's say you're doing house hunting or going to somebody's house you've never been there, or going apartment hunting, and you walk in and it feels really weird.
Yeah.
Either really good or really bad. And it has nothing to do with the decor or the smell, but it feels really good or really bad. That's the energy of the people who are living there. That's the emotions. That's the imprint. That's the residue that's there.
Right. Absolutely. And we've seen that so many times.
Yeah. And not just one family, but maybe generations.
Right. And I should mention there's a story that Tony Cornell, who was one of my, I can't call him a mentor, but somebody who is really a big name in the British side of this investigative process. Tony was a 50+ year veteran doing investigations for the Society for Psychical Research. And I met him a number of years ago at a small conference we were speaking at. And he talked about a place that he investigated, a pub he investigated in England back in the 60s. And after talking to witnesses and everybody, they pretty much didn't come up with too much evidence. There wasn't a lot of consistency for the experiences. So really, was it really haunted? They were pretty sure that there really wasn't a thing there. So they're all drinking with some of these witnesses. They're having beers or ales afterwards and talking about the fact that the ghost story that was being told locally was not a great story to begin with. So they came up with a new story. So this would be a much better ghost story, which is the story they tell to this day. And witnesses have sworn by experiencing things from that story. So the question, Tony, actually, even when talking to him about that, when we're talking about it, I said, so did you, in creating that story, did you leave that imprint behind of that story? And he says, don't know. Could just be word of mouth and expectation.
That would be interesting to study, because it could be either or, right? You could have created something, almost something similar to like an egregore by the story being told over and over again, or people have maybe not even realized they've heard the story or heard it in the background when they're at the place, and it's the power of suggestion. And I don't know how you would separate that or tell the difference between the two of those things.
There's a way to do that in an experiment, but it would take some doing with making sure the people who were walking in there didn't know what place it was, and taking them to multiple pubs that are very similar, the others not being haunted, that kind of thing.
So a lot of work.
A little bit of
work. A little bit of work. Can we circle back around to television for a moment? Because so after I took your classes, Loyd, and I started investigating private residences, I found one of the biggest obstacles to be paranormal reality TV, because it sets an expectation for people. What do you think the biggest problem with paranormal TV's effect on the research is?
Well, it's an effect on the public, and the public is who we're working with. So, and it's not just paranormal reality TV. It's also movies over the years that have claimed to have been based on or inspired by true stories. People have an expectation now that it's going to be negative, almost, and that is not just media. I mean, this goes back to ghost stories and all sorts of stuff in all sorts of traditions and folklore. But the shows really push the idea that this stuff is going to be negative. One of the shows, Paranormal State, had the whole demon thing really heavily involved in there. Mm-hmm. It supports, the shows are looking at scary stuff because that's what sells. That's what the ratings are. The very fact that they did Night Shot to begin with was to make it spooky. But as you know, Sarah, from taking the classes, investigating in the dark makes literally no sense.
No sense.
Unless it's the only time that the witnesses are saying that's when they experience something. That would be the only thing. So there's an expectation about equipment. I know that this friend of mine who passed away, Pete Haviland, his group years ago, after Ghost Hunters started up, they weren't getting a lot of cases in Texas, in the Houston area. So he signed up as a kind of affiliate of one of the TAPS family groups. And he said 50% of the time, what sounded like a really good case, when they got to the location, 50% of the time, the people said, "Where are Jason and Grant? Where's the TV crew?" So they would turn around and say, "Yeah, they're not coming. We're leaving." So there's also this expectation, if there's any sort of a connection in anybody's mind that they're connected to one of the TV shows, that they're doing this for TV. And it's getting worse because of YouTube. People want to be on TV, which is not the case for most real residential cases. The whole pop culture influence is huge, and we really need to, in the interview process, find out what they've been exposed to. And I always ask if they watch the shows. I used to ask back in the 80s, do you read the National Enquirer and the Weekly World News and things like that? So have you seen the Amityville Horror, Poltergeist, the Entity movie? What did you think? And I always ask, what did you think, or what do you think of these things?
Right. Cyn, do you have a question?
I do. It's a little bit off the subject, but not too terribly far. Bucket list. Top 3 places you would like to investigate. Excuse me, I didn't mean to say investigate. It was supposed to be scientifically study or something.
Well, I'm
sorry.
Sure, no, it's okay. So I can tell you places I love to visit, but the question is, are there witnesses to talk to? That's the big question. I'd love to go to Edinburgh Castle, just because I've heard so much cool stuff about it. And there are witnesses there. I would very much, not for investigation, but necessarily, love to go to Hampton Court in London area, because that's got a long history of stuff as well.
I've been there. I have been there.
Because of something that I learned about not too long ago, I would like to talk to the people who live at a particular home in Greenwich Village, which was supposedly that Holzer investigated. The address is 12 Gay Street, and that's what it's been called for. It originally was a bigger building cut in half in multiple apartments. And I'd like to go there because Holzer found something interesting there, kind of an imprint there which fits all the models. And then there was an imprint in the upstairs apartment of a man coming out of the shadows and resolving into a man in like a tux, evening clothes. And the description fit a character named Lamont Cranston, who also was known as the Shadow in The Pulse. And as it turned out, Walter B. Gibson, who I've met years and years ago, who not only wrote 285 shadow novels, but also wrote books on parapsychology later on in life. He was a famous magician, well-known magician. He was convinced that because he lived there and wrote the last several shadow novels, that he left an imprint of the Shadow and Lamont Cranston. So I'd like to see
if that's possible, right?
Yeah.
That's possible that he did that. Wouldn't it be? Like if he wrote a story, I would think writing something.
Fiction might leave a thought form of sorts. Yeah.
Oh, I hope my fiction does not come true.
No, I mean, Gibson often he wrote 285 novels about this character. That's a lot more than most people, other than maybe comic book writers, actually write. And he felt that he would tell the story as if the Shadow or Lamont Cranston or one of his other identities was standing next to him, giving him the information about the story. So that's how he kind of visualized the whole process. So he felt that was a piece of it.
Interesting. Super interesting. That is super. Yeah. I wonder if they did that. It almost sounds like, I don't know if you've seen it, but they did a TV show based on Hans Holzer's work called The Holzer Files.
Yeah.
I want to say that was one of the episodes. You know, obviously I take these things with a grain of salt, but it's good to see these locations. And then you can go do your own research.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I have some concerns about the way that those, because I've read some of the stories that Holzer wrote up, and they just were redone for television in ways that didn't really make sense based on the actual story.
Yeah, that's what television does, though, right? We mentioned earlier that they created, so part of the reason people investigate at night is because it makes the things that light up and go beep look better, and they turn off all the lights and they do night shot because it's creepier. And that's the way people want to investigate now. So everything's kind of redone for reality TV, right? To just make it look interesting, be interesting.
You know, it's interesting that people are following those methods they see on TV. I mean, you don't see people running out and pretending to be cops like on the TV show Cops, or doing, doing other things from reality TV. People just don't know how television's being made for the most part. I mean, even something like Real Housewives, they are not necessarily spontaneous on the show. If there's an argument between the women, there might have been an argument they caught, but the director more likely came in and said, you know what, let's redo that. I want to see more action. I want to see some yelling. I want to see some more emotion. Because what you actually end up seeing is not necessarily candid. I mean, I've done a lot of shows over the years, and they'll ask you, okay, that was really great the way you came into the room and what you said, but you need to come in faster and say it a lot more succinctly. And can you say it this way, or can you say it that way? It's not reflecting actuality. It's not scripted, but it is directed. And then there's the edit process afterwards as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had this conversation. I think Mike's brought this up a lot of times about the production of reality TV and how many issues. And it's kind of become a big topic on the show, how many issues it's causing, because it does affect the public, which is part of why we're doing this. And we're trying to get people to understand what it's really like. And from taking your classes, I learned that it is more about the experiences and the witnesses. So rather than the equipment, what we're really investigating is the living people, not only our witnesses, but our own senses.
Exactly.
And you taught us that the most important tool that we can actually have in an investigation is a really good medium.
A good psychic. Yeah. Somebody who, but you have to make sure that they are vetted and there's certain qualities you have to look at for that as well.
Right.
But you still need witnesses. And if you don't have people to talk about what they're experiencing, you're not really investigating a spooky old building. You're just going in to see if you can have an experience. The technology can support the experience, but tech on its own doesn't do much other than tell you that there might be something weird in the environment. And that weirdness could be, as you mentioned, Cyn, bad wiring. It could be any number of things. And that equipment can often be good at finding those other things, which is great. In fact, I found more bad wiring and other electrical issues with an EMF meter than I've ever found anything to do with the paranormal.
Can you tell us that one story, Loyd? I don't know if I'm able to recall it so that you can actually tell it, but you investigated a house for people that were trying to get out of a lease. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So this was a case here in the Bay Area. It's actually in my local town years ago. This was a house that had only been built about a year before. It was built on the site of, there used to be a ranch there. There's still a barn there. The barn had been fixed up, but they built this house. This architecture professor owned the property and he built this house. They had been trying to get a hold of anybody to come out because they were experiencing things like one of the rooms felt really bad, weird. They would get very nauseous or dizzy there. They would get headaches in certain parts of the house. They would see shadows out of the corner of their eyes. They get these really noxious odors that they'd smell every once in a while that would seem to move around on their own. And then occasionally they'd see a flash of fire in midair once in a while against a wall or against an appliance. That's just like the highlights. All right. So
that's the highlight?
Yeah, that's the highlights. The family had contacted many universities in the Bay Area. They always got funneled to the psych department and were told, this family of four, mind you, they were told to come in for psych testing because obviously there's something wrong with them. Didn't matter that all four of them having the experience. Finally, one of the local police department referred them to me because they were out of who else to call at that point. So when we went out there, the folks I had with me were a couple of my grad students from, this was back when we had our parapsychology program at JFK University. And the husband of one of the grad students who happened to be an engineer and worked in a place, he couldn't tell us what he did for the government, but he worked for the government in what's called the Blue Cube here in the Bay Area. And then a couple of other folks also. And everybody had a little bit of extra background and all sorts of other things. So we go to the house, and as we approach the house, Doug, the engineer, says, the house is slightly off its foundation right over here. And he points to this one spot. In the Bay Area, you don't always have basements. So it was basically a crawl space underneath. And it was concrete cinder block construction for the foundation. And it really was, you could see it was off the foundation right under this one room. That turned out to be the room where people were feeling weird. We go in the house, we kind of do a check around the house. We go to that room. We felt a little weird, a little bit dizzy. So I took out one of the most useful tools you can find, two useful tools. One was a carpenter's level. The floor was not level because it was off its foundation. And it was just enough off that would make you not notice unless you like rolled something on the floor. And then I measured using a protractor, measured the windows and doors, and they were slightly off 90 degrees, which again, your eyes are going to see as off 90 degrees, but your brain is going to see it 90 degrees. So you get headaches from that. We are walking through the place, and I did smell something weird. It smelled kind of like methane. So right behind the house is a hill. And I sent a couple people to go to the top of the hill. What's on the other side of the hill? The Martinez landfill. The smell was because methane gas was seeping up through the ground into the house from the Martinez landfill. I had another case where there was buried garbage in the backyard, and that was actually coming up and catching on fire. So when I mentioned that case to Doug, he said, let's see if there's a lot of static electricity here. So the house is directly underneath high tension wires, which makes our EMF meters useless, by the way. So Doug pulls out a cheap static electricity detector. So I recommend everybody get at least a 1 foot, but preferably a 2 foot long fluorescent light tube. And if there's a lot of static electricity in the air and you wave it around, it will light up. It's very cool. It's like a magic trick. So that's there. And then we find out that the architecture guy who built this place, he was trying a new kind of insulation. So in the holes you see in cinder block, he pumped in liquid styrofoam which is an insulator, but it also enhances static electricity. And then we found that there was low frequency sound coming off the wires, both high and low frequency hums. And the low frequency sound could actually cause your eyeballs to vibrate and cause you to see shadows out of the corner of your eye. The static electricity catching the methane on fire. So there was a normal explanation for every one of the things, but frankly, no one would normally expect that to happen in one single place.
Right.
They were trying to get out of their lease. They tried they had been there for a few months. They were trying to get out of this 1-year lease, telling the landlord that it was haunted. He said, "You're out of your mind. It's a brand new place," the whole thing. So we gave him a list of all the zoning violations and other environmental issues. And we gave them the list to tell him. They started talking to him about this. He still was resistant. And I had recommended actually, that they tell him that they'll take him to court. First, they'll report him to the county for the zoning violations, which will immediately cause an issue. And then they'll take him to court for the lease. So he not only he said, "Okay, don't report it. I'll have to fix all this stuff, but I'll let you out of the lease and pay you and give you back the back rent," because they wanted all their back rent as well. So they got that. And shortly after, I said to the guy, the main guy in the house, I said, "So you're going to call the county?" He said, "You damn right."
Yeah.
And they did call the county. I don't know what happened after that, but the owner was not fast enough in fixing those zoning violations. Let's put it that way.
Wow. That's such a great story because it's such a good example of how you as an investigator really helped these people by using the knowledge to look for the normal explanations first, and kind of illustrates a lot of the things that happen in our environment that cause us to feel as if something paranormal is happening. And
and I should mention that one of the things, and I have heard this from some people in the community, the paranormal community, about looking for things like black mold and stuff, because that can cause serious health issues and hallucinations. And the thing that really bugged me about this whole case is that all these university psych departments didn't even think that there could have been something environmental. I mean, they went immediately to you're psychologically disturbed. They didn't think that there could be some other things that are not paranormal that could affect them. And that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's a problem. I don't tell this story like on air a lot, but I was having some psychological testing for some attention issues, as many of us in the entertainment field have. And they just casually talking, they asked me, what my hobbies were. And I mentioned that I do this and that I like to do. They told me I was schizophrenic because I talked to ghosts and tried to put me on antipsychotic medication. I was like, "No, thank you. I'm good. I'm not schizophrenic." But, that's just, that's where I think the minds of a lot of psychologists are.
Yeah. The folks, the scientists, if you want to call them that, in any field that are most likely disbelieving and not open to anything paranormal, psychic, or otherwise are psychologists.
Yeah.
And to the point where, even the diagnostic tool, the DSM, has been changed a little bit. Used to be if you had a psychic experience, it was a symptom of being schizophrenic, but they have kind of pulled that back. They also recently, I think, changed the hearing music in your head, because people talk about hearing voices as schizophrenics. Well, we all can get a song stuck in our head. That's hearing voices, isn't it? So that used to be like one of the indications of schizophrenia automatically. It's like, really? So when I have to say, the whole idea of parapsychology being a social science, it's because we're dealing with behavior and experience, which is different than physics and chemistry. And when I talk to psychologists who are doing experiments and they consider themselves scientists like physicists, I should tell them to go talk to some physicists. I often do that because most physicists will say, "Yeah, it's not a real science."
Yeah, right.
So, I have no problem with physical scientists telling me that parapsychology is not a real science. I just follow that up immediately and say, "Is psychology a science?" And if they say yes, then I'll argue with them. But usually they say no.
Right, because it's the same thing. We're studying behaviors and consciousness. Like, it's exactly the same thing as psychology. We can't, ask questions, look at a person's brain and ask them questions necessarily at the
Well,
same
and
time that easily.
you're not going to get 100% repeatability for anything, especially if you're dealing with different participants or
Right.
subjects in an experiment, because everybody's different. I mean, if you're studying the one person who has OCD, they'll probably do that thing over and over again exactly the same way. But if you're
Right.
looking at normal people and looking at more than a few, you can't have 100% replicability in any experiment.
Mhm.
And our replication rate for some of ours is actually better than a lot of psychology experiments.
Wow. Cyn, do you have any questions?
Actually, I just got back from an investigation in Kentucky. And one of the places we went to, now this was just a walkthrough before our investigation. We went to the Octagon House in Franklin, Kentucky. Octagon House, of course, is very old. They had, of course, soldiers there, as used it as a hospital during the war, that kind of thing. Other than the floor being a little unlevel in certain places, I found just the shape of the house a little discombobulating.
Mm-hmm.
Just, you walk in because you're not used to anything but squared off rooms and houses. So that was odd to me. And
yeah, I mean,
what do you think about that?
That makes a lot of sense. I think a place I've been to many times, the Winchester Mystery House,
I love it.
Discombobulating in so many different ways, but it's very, very cool. But that's the thing, is that illusionists in the magic world, I'm also a mentalist, psychic entertainer. I've been involved in the magic world since almost as long as I've been involved in parapsychology directly. And there are auditory illusions, there are optical illusions, there are all sorts of kinds of illusions, and shapes of space make a difference. There are still a few operating mystery spots in the United States.
Yes. The one in San Jose.
Yeah, in Santa Cruz. Yeah. And they were all designed apparently by the same guy, like decades ago. When I went to the mystery spot in Santa Cruz in the mountains there, I had been to one in the East Coast when I was a kid. And it was so weird. I walk into this thing and I hadn't even thought about this, that I'd even been to one, but I felt huge deja vu because it was pretty much, terrain was different, but the effects were exactly the same. And apparently the guy who designed them all over. They all have just different stories. The story they're telling in Santa Cruz, it's either a crashed UFO in the hill or a meteor that is like embedded there that's causing all sorts of weird stuff to happen.
You guys are going to tell me what a mystery. What's a mystery
it's
spot,
one of those places that when they build it on an angle, but when you walk in, you think it's straight. You see it as straight, but it's not.
Water
you're
go uphill. They have water coming down. It seems to go uphill. There's a place, one room where if a person stands in the corner, they're going to look much bigger than the person standing in front of them. But if they stand in another corner, they're going to look really tiny. Yeah. It uses all sorts of optical principles based on the fact that we don't see the world, perceive the world the way that our eyes actually see it. And so there's a lot of sensation things. And there's a place where it looks like you're kind of leaning back, even though on the hill, even though they're actually really leaning forward. So it's a lot of really interesting optical principles. And it's something that if there's one, anytime anybody's near one who's an investigator, you absolutely should go to it, because it's not paranormal, but it'll teach you a little bit.
Sarah,
I should, but it sounds like it would make me nauseous. Like I feel like it would give me a headache and make me nauseous.
Yeah.
That's what optical illusions do to me.
Yeah. People will say that.
Yeah.
That's
Sarah,
why. Maybe that's why you get nauseous.
I have a picture from the mystery spot holding where it was a spot. Yes. It was a spot where you could hold on to something. I can't remember what it was, but you're holding on to something. So in the picture, it looks like you're hanging sideways, just, like at a diagonal instead of straight up and down.
Straight
all illusion.
nauseousness.
You know, the
It's
thing,
illusion,
the thing
but
that we have to, the thing we have to remember is that perception and sense is not the same thing. You know, one of the main reasons not to investigate in the dark is because in the dark, you cannot tell where a sound comes from the same way you can when the lights are on. And there are a number of other sensory perceptual things that happen in the dark that we're terrible perceivers of what's happening when it's dark.
Right.
And there have been scientific studies in psychology of perception. Magicians or mentalists, we've made use of this for a long time. And even the phony mediums have made use of this over the years, over the decades as well. So darkness is not your friend for a lot of reasons.
So, hello, darkness, not my friend?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go to sleep, it's definitely your friend, but, you know. Exactly.
Exactly. Cyn, we're running out of time. This is hyped up my whole, like, I'm like, want to take another class. I know. I'm like ready now. Like, I'm reinvigorated. Batman can what, Mike? Batman can see in the dark?
Batman has infrared lenses in his cowl.
Oh, thank you. We needed a guy to tell us that.
I read comic books. I know this stuff. Yeah.
So does Mike. He's probably very sad he's missing this right now. I'm sure he is.
You know he is. Because as soon as you agreed with him, he was like, finally, somebody agrees with me. Finally.
Yeah. Actually, so Loyd, you've said a lot of things that King Mike Owl says a lot, and he gets frustrated because no one listens to him. Like a lot of things about the production of reality TV, a lot of things about magicians and mentalists. So I'm sure he's very, very happy right now, but we are running out of time. So Cyn, any burning, lingering questions that you have left for Professor Paranormal?
Have asked everything. Where can someone get in touch with you if they would like to take your courses?
Well, the courses are offered through the Rhine Research Center, the Rhine Education Center. So just simply go to Rhine, RHINE.org, or the link that's on the screen, which is Rhine EDU. So you go to Rhine.org, click on education. RhineEDU.org takes you to our education page. We haven't listed the classes coming up in May yet, but those will be listed probably the beginning of April is when they tend to go up for that. That's one place. You can find me on Facebook. It's just Loyd.Auerbach.author on Facebook. You can watch my every other week, my own podcast of sorts, which is called Ask Professor Paranormal. It's a live Q&A that I do. The next one is Sunday, the 17th of March. It is at 5:30 Pacific time, 8:30 Eastern on YouTube. It's YouTube/@Ask Professor Paranormal. And folks can always email me at profparanormal, as in Professor Paranormal, @gmail.com.
Awesome. I will try to gather all of that for everyone because I know I've had questions and put it up on the YouTube description for the show so that they can find you, Loyd. Sorry, Cyn? Cyn, what were you going to say?
I cannot believe I have not said this yet. This is what popped out at me the most when I saw who was coming on and I looked you up. Haunted by chocolate. Do you know how haunted by chocolate I am?
Not personally, but I am, certainly.
Let me just tell you, I am.
Yeah. I've had a little side business over the years. I actually have a certificate as a professional chocolatier that I got in 2009. Don't really make chocolate that much anymore, but that's going to be my retirement. I'm going to open a chocolate shop. But I've been doing guided chocolate tastings since 2005, which is hard to believe it's been that long. And so that's kind of a side thing that I've been doing. And it's just, as a food guy, chocolate is like the ultimate to me.
Yeah. That sounds fun. Now I want chocolate.
That's like heaven.
But I don't have good chocolate. I want good chocolate, like good chocolate.
Well, you can always email me and I can make recommendations.
Thank you. Yeah. There we go. Loyd, did we miss anything else you've got coming up that you'd like to mention?
But I will mention that you held up my paranormal casebook, and it's been re-released in the second edition now. In fact, I should show it.
Here's the one I have.
Here's the new one.
Oh, okay.
It is, I've updated some of the information. The same cases. I'm going to be working on a second volume at this point, but I just re-released in paperback. Kindle is coming soon. Been too busy grading stuff for my courses right now to do that. But the paperback is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble at the moment. So, and then there's a couple other things that I'm working on. And then the mystery novels, one is called Afterlife and the other is called Near Death. And it's, I'm the third author on that. And like I said, they're paranormal mystery novels. One of the main characters is a parapsychologist who is also involved in anthropology and a magician as well. So
I know we have to have you back just to talk when Mike's well, just to talk about the magic, because he
Sure.
would love that so much. And folks, if you don't have it, I don't know if you can see this. This is ESP Hauntings and Poltergeist. This is actually on. We have an Amazon list, legitpodcast.com, and I make book recommendations. And I use this all the time when I investigate. So I go back to it.
Glad to hear it.
Definitely get that. Cyn, how about you? What do you got coming up?
I have more investigations coming up. Brushy Mountain Prison coming up next month. I'm so excited. And I think you and I have to talk, Sarah, about another one coming up.
That we're
It's a
doing
secret.
in May
It's a
together. It's
Yes.
a secret right now, but yes. Cyn, myself, and can we say Mandy the Machine from Ghost
Yes.
Sisters? We'll be doing an
Absolutely.
investigation together at the end of May. So keep your eye out for that. Cyn's books will be with us at the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash the last weekend in July. Thank you everyone for watching. Loyd, this was such a good show. I'm sad Mike missed it. I think you mentioned there's going to be a class on, like, what was it? Survival.
It's
Survival of
human consciousness and survival of bodily death, looking at the evidence for life after death. Yeah, that's coming up in May. I
think you're going to see me in that class. I have a feeling you're going to see me in that class. That sounds amazing. Legit Podcast, DOTCOM on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Please support all our hosts by following us and by liking and subscribing at Legit Podcast on YouTube. What a great Sunday show. Thank you again, Loyd. So for Professor Paranormal himself, Loyd Auerbach, Cyn Shrader Hill Author, I'm Sarah Paranormal. This has been Legit Paranormal. Tomorrow is Monday, so we have Is It Legit at 8:05, and then we have Legit Ladies Spill the Tea. I'm actually going to be talking about my own personal journey on that show, so join us tomorrow night. Have a good night, everyone.